It's an interesting story of how I know I have Swedish in me. Now, of course, I'm writing about how I have visions. I do not know which of these visions are from God and which ones are just in my imagination. I treat them all with skepticism. But there's a lot of coincidences that confirm to me that they're not all, false. So one of the things is there's this girl named Denise Naslund. She came into my cell, and I saw her place a rose on the floor. 2 days later, I remembered her mother had the name Rose in it, and her mother was so devastated when Denise died performing an act of kindness for some man that was pretending to be injured. Anyway, long story short, I could sometimes see visions of the nation of France, and I could see her in France with Napoleon Bonaparte and Joan of Arc and all the souls, French people that had died and gone off to their eternal reward. And this was before the terrorist attacks, and I was filling up notebooks full of prayers for France. And then when the terrorist attacks happened, I could see Denise Naslund picking flowers in France and bringing them to my cell, and those flowers were the victims uprooted by terrorism. To test what was going on in my mind and heart, I decided to call my dad and ask him about the last name Naslund. Is it French? Because it seemed clear she was French. Well, he said, no, it's Swedish, and I was disappointed. I didn't know where Sweden was on the map. It must not be an important country. And then he said, Matt, you have Swedish in you on your mom's side. Well, no, I didn't know that. And so that's something that's very interesting. And then I didn't like football, but I just happened to be in Minnesota, and the football team here is called the Vikings. The Swedes were Vikings, so now I like football all of a sudden through her. And it was we lived in a very place that had very high Scandinavian population, and then I found out the Swedes conquered northern France, and they became the Normans. Then they went into Great Britain, and they fought the battle for the crown, the Battle of Hastings. And I just happened to be in jail for 11 months in Hastings, Minnesota. So that was interesting, and I felt she was saying this is the battle for the crown. Another interesting thing is I never saw any money while I was in jail, save for a 1974 penny just showed up. 1974 was when she died, so it was a very precious relic that reminded me of her. And I believed it was a gift. Well, the staff were searching our cells and whatnot, stripping us down, and they took the penny, and this little song flowed, "Don't let 'em take my penny, little Denny, don't let 'em take my penny away. It dated back to 1974, when you were reborn in heaven, welcomed a new saint." Well, I got out, and I asked some guy, when did Richard Nixon get impeached? I was in a treatment center. He said, I think 1974. So I went outside and I began to sing the Denny Penny song, and it ends with, "Restore my penny, little Denny, because it's worth a fortune to me. It dated back to 1974, an important time in history." I go back into the treatment center, and there's this little boy, Mohammed, playing with a little hockey game with pennies. So I told him the penny story. He said, let me check and see if I have any 1974 pennies here. He had a total of 4 pennies that dated back to before there was the time with the shield on the pennies. Sure enough, there's a 1974 penny. It was a very interesting encounter because I just said, "Restore my penny, little Denny." Just sang that song. Restore the penny. I go back and the penny's restored minutes later through a guy named Mohammed, who's a Muslim, and I had great animosity and resentment towards Muslims. And it led to his interest in my spirituality, and we began talking, and he was so much more humble than most non-Muslims I meet, and so I felt the message there through this penny, through Denise Naslund, was to throw away, to love Muslims, and to throw away my hostilities, and to respect them, even if I disagree with the Prophet Muhammad and Sharia law and so many things about Islam I disagree with. Another interesting thing regarding Sweden is I was dedicating a day of each month to be devoted to various saints of various nations, to pray with those saints and to pray for those nations and to consecrate those nations to God and to invade those nations and bless them with all the angels and saints. And I decided August 5th, the 5th was to be the Feast of Sweden, because that day someone in our unit got stabbed, and while the staff were taking the man to SAG, cleaning up the blood and whatnot, we were stuck in another room where there was encyclopedias. And so I read about Sweden for the first time, and I bonded with King Eric IX, a very interesting patron saint of Sweden, crusader who lost his head, and he was uncanonized, sort of like my devotion to a lot of these saints were uncanonized saints. It's almost unheard of that you hear of an uncanonized patron saint of a country. And so that was kind of cool. So I had also called the Swedes yellow jackets because when I was praying to the Swedish saints prior to that, I had visions of them wearing yellow Napoleonic jackets with black pants. I go back to my unit and I get stung by a yellow jacket. None of the other 11 months was there just some random yellow jacket in there, and inside the unit like that. And then I called my dad after assigning that feast day to the Feast of Sweden. I asked, who's the patron saint of that day? And he said, Our Lady of the Snows, which was very interesting because I called the Swedes snowmen because so much of Sweden is up there by the Arctic Circle, and some of it's on the other side of the Arctic Circle. So very, I guess, cold and snowy place. So very interesting. And then I got out and I had a Swedish roommate, and we drive by this castle called the Swedish Institute every day. The team is called the Vikings because of the high Swedish population, or high Scandinavian population. And we used to be, the treatment center is in a Swedish neighborhood. So all of those coincidences, and there was so many more coincidences as well, involving so many other saints in heaven, that I know that not all of this is just in my imagination or wishful thinking, but I do believe some of it is. But there's something more. Like, for instance, the map that was on the wall for Sweden. On one side it had an S and a W separated by water, so that on the other side it said Eden. So it was the word Sweden was separated, so that one half of the nation separated from the water said Eden. And then I was showing people my prayer beads and talking about and how that praying on the rosary, my prayer beads relieve stress. And then I walk outside and there's beads in a bag with the words Eden. I guess some Eden beads. And I brought up a Japanese, in a story about forgiveness, I brought up a Japanese POW named Louis Zamborini, who he was almost tortured to death. He got out, he returned to Japan to be a missionary, and he went into the POW camps where they were torturing him, and he saw the people torturing them, and he went and he threw his arms around them, told them how much he loves and forgives them, how much God loves them. And somebody said, that's Stockholm Syndrome. And I said, Stockholm Syndrome? He said, yeah, when you fall in love with your captors. It means like Stockholm, like Sweden. And it just so happens that this girl was kidnapped, captured, and tortured to death and had to watch another girl die. And I believe she's in heaven, and I believe she is assigned to many sociopaths and people that have been abused, and, people drug addicted, pornography addicted, mental and emotional disorders. So maybe you should ask her into your mind and heart. Her name is Denise Naslin. May God bless.